Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs, and today we're going to do a tier list of all of the stuff coming in the next gameplay drop for Minecraft, because as of the latest series of snapshots, they have said that all of the features that they plan on adding in this gameplay drop are now in the game. Now, in another life on another series, I was known as the Copper King, and so I figured it's probably a good time to give my thoughts on all of these new Copper editions and see how they rank up in the royal brain. So without further ado, it's time to don my regal attire and get into what I think makes some of these new Copper features truly special. To begin with, I'm going to load up a fresh survival world with a spooky face up there on the mountain, and we're going to go looking for some early game resources for tools. Because one of the additions I think people are on the fence about in this drop are the Copper tools and armor. Now, I think it's fair to say that a lot of folks who are used to playing late game Minecraft really won't see the point in them adding Copper tools and armor, and I can see the logic in that. But I think the thing to remember is that a lot of folks like to restart Minecraft quite frequently, and usually that tool grind is a bit of a slow one for them, especially if they are newer players who don't know where to find iron effectively. Stone is all around us, but iron is a little bit more scarce, and once you've got your first pickaxe upgrade, you're kind of looking forward to getting the next one. But for most people, the first metal they find won't be iron, it will be copper, because copper generates in a much broader range of coordinates in the world and a lot closer to the surface. But since copper was added to the game, I can imagine a lot of new players who've joined Minecraft are kind of confused when the first metal that they find can't be used to make any kind of tools. Let's not forget, we got these 7 raw copper from 3 blocks of ore. Copper is one of those materials that gives you a bunch more than just a single piece. And that means very soon after having acquired a little bit of copper, I can get myself a copper shovel and a copper pickaxe nice and easily, and we can compare the durability of these tools. Now, a wooden pickaxe only gets you about 60 durability, a stone pickaxe gets you just over 130, and a copper pickaxe or axe or shovel or whatever is going to have 190 durability, so just under 3 stacks, just over 2 stacks, and just under 1 stack for each of these 3 tiers of material. There aren't any mid-tier ores in the game that can't be mined with a stone pickaxe that can be mined with a copper one, unfortunately. Copper pickaxes are basically slightly upgraded stone pickaxes, but with copper being a fairly soft material, I think that makes a decent amount of sense, and I think the inclusion of copper tools and armor solves a problem a lot of players have, which is confidence in their first caving expedition. If we wanted to kill this cow for some leather, we get 2 leather, and I don't really see that many other cows around here, so the chances of me getting a full suit of armor out of leather before I've gotten caving is, frankly, a little low. But as we can demonstrate here, I can spot some copper again pretty much immediately. We could get hold of that if we wanted to, and use that to make some copper armor for an early caving expedition. And there's something about the caving confidence of being clad in a full suit of metal armor that's really going to change the game for some players who are frightened of the mobs that lurk in dark places. Now, of course, more experienced players are going to be able to hop down to iron tiers straight away, could probably just staircase down and find some, loot a shipwreck, or even go up into mountains for the iron ores that generate at higher coordinates, but new players aren't to know that, and some people like to play games like this unspoiled. So even though experienced players are probably going to ditch the copper tools and armor quite quickly, I think they really have a place in the game for the newer players. I'm finding a bit more copper here nice and easily. It's still my first day in this world. The sun hasn't even started to set yet, and I think between these 2 furnaces, I just about have enough raw copper for most of a suit of armor, if not a full one. So as the sun goes down on my first day in this world, I've got nearly a full suit of armor, just missing a couple of ingots for the boots. That covers nearly half of my armor bar, meaning I'm slightly better defended, and I have a more durable axe with which to fight off some of those early game mob encounters. Do I think copper tools and armor are useful? Yes. Do I think they're going to be anything people care about in late game? Probably not. And so for those of us like me who like to play the survival game long term, I think copper tools and armor can rest comfortably in C tier. And I've no idea why the pickaxe was that angle when I put it in the item frame. I've corrected that slightly so it looks like the sprite in the hotbar. But inevitably players are going to find iron sooner or later, and if you're like me, once you found iron, you're rarely going to look back at the earlier tiers of armor. You're going to be looking ahead to stuff like diamond. Naturally, the same goes for tools as well, and while the copper armor could sit quite nicely on an armor stand and you could put the tools in item frames and save them for later, a lot of folks are just going to want to get rid of them. So of course, we turn to our next feature in this copper upgrade, which is copper nuggets. By smelting down a tool or breaking down a copper ingot, you'll get hold of some copper nuggets, and those can actually be used to create their own unique torches. These are made in a similar way to soul torches, but the copper nugget goes on top of the crafting recipe instead of below where you'd normally find the soul sand in a soul torch. And true to real-life chemistry, when you end up burning copper powder in a flame, it turns the flame a shade of green, and that's why these torches have this interesting green flame to them. They give off the same light level as regular torches, but it's really cool seeing them side by side, and if you've got a little bit of spare copper lying around, why not convert them into these copper torches for a slightly different twist on lighting. The copper nugget itself doesn't really have a great deal of functionality by itself. It's not a trading resource or anything like that. Maybe you could use them as copper pieces if you wanted to create like a currency system, a bit D&D, where you've got copper, iron, and gold nuggets as copper, silver, and gold pieces, but it's really just a crafting ingredient, therefore it probably doesn't belong any higher than C tier. I can't really put it in D tier because it does have a use, and I think it fulfills that use admirably, plus I quite like the sprite of it. This little nugget of copper looks quite good. I should also add that none of the copper tools and armor will age. They won't oxidize the same way other copper stuff will, so maybe for you that bumps them down to D tier, but I think they feel pretty comfortable in C. Meanwhile, the copper torch, I think, is a pretty fun addition to the game, especially because in addition to the redstone torch, the regular torch, and the soul torch, we now have this little rainbow of torches, and this could potentially open up discussions of colored lighting once Mojang makes some changes to the rendering engine, which they're doing in Java Edition right now. And maybe that's a little bit of wishful thinking, but that makes me want to put the copper torch firmly in B tier. I think it adds atmosphere when you have these colored lights, even if the light they give off is still that generic warm glow. And now that we've got copper nuggets in the game, you might be wondering, can these copper nuggets do similar stuff to what iron nuggets can? The answer is yes, they can. We have the recipe now for both a copper chain and a copper lantern. The copper lantern has to be made with a copper torch. No other torch will do, because when you craft it, it will have that same green flame that the copper torch does. The copper chain is crafted in exactly the same way as the iron chain is, and both of these behave in the same way as the existing iron chains and lanterns. But the fantastic thing about them is they have all of the different aging stages of copper. As the copper lantern ages, it will go through the usual exposed, weathered, and fully oxidized range of copper, as will the copper chain. Obviously, you can mix and match these as much as you want. You can also wax them to make sure they preserve their age and don't end up aging any further stages. And as with other copper materials, that wax can be scraped off by right-clicking it with an axe. Personally, I'm a really big fan of the weathered and fully oxidized variations of this. I think the regular copper one looks lovely as well. I'm less of a fan of the contrast between the pink and green of the exposed copper, but I'm sure you'll find a use for that somewhere. I think one aspect of this players are going to find a little strange, though, is the contrast between them and a copper bulb. The copper bulb, as it ages, gives off a dimmer light level, so the fully oxidized copper bulb only gives off a light level of, I think, 3 or 4. It's 4 at the source, but then 3 on the blocks immediately adjacent to it, whereas the oxidized copper lantern gives off the full light level of 15 that other types of lanterns do. And there is absolutely no variation in this based on age, which some players might find a good thing, and I personally think it's nice to have a bunch of diverse looking light sources that are still going to mob proof a large area. But some players' opinions may differ, so sound off in the comments whether you would put these in the same tier as I am, because I'm putting copper chains and copper lanterns firmly in A tier. I like them a lot. I think it's so nice whenever we get anything new in copper and not 1 block but 4 blocks get added. And I think there's a couple of really fun building techniques that these copper chains open up for us, like the ability to make it look like iron chains have rusted by transitioning through the exposed stage into full copper, and now the freshest stage of copper looks like a rusty stage of iron. And I think the same thing is true of the next addition we're going to cover, and that is copper bars. We're used to iron bars being in the game already. There are now copper variations of that exact same texture, all the way down once again to fully oxidized copper bars. And I'm using the waxed versions here, but of course they come waxed and unwaxed. Now I think it's a really cool idea to once again have some iron bars in here, but then in areas where they might have corroded slightly, we can make it look like the exposed bars and the regular copper bars are more rusty versions of them, so this area has corroded, allowing the player to step on through. You could even mix in some weathered copper bars or some oxidized bars if you wanted to add a bit of glow lichen and moss around to make it look like the area had become overgrown. That natural greenish blue that these have, I think, would be perfect for an overgrown or damp dungeon. But aside from that, copper bars aren't really all that impressive. I mean, they're just a repeat of iron bars with a few different textures. And while the same is true of chains, I think those naturally pair really well with the lanterns, which kind of have their own aesthetic. I've also seen some people say they weren't too happy with the fact that copper bars are just a repeat of the same texture as iron bars, and I kind of agree with that. I think it makes sense for them to blend together, but they are going firmly in B tier for me. Another new addition that I think is actually going to tie a lot of these together, though, is the addition of different stages of aging for lightning rods. Up until now, we've only had the copper lightning rod, and the justification for that has been that they're meant to get struck by lightning, which naturally removes aging stages from any blocks of copper in the area, so the thing that's designed to be struck by lightning should stay pretty fresh. With that said, players are using lightning rods for all sorts of different stuff. I've personally used them for things like pipes in different steampunk styles of builds, and so it makes sense that with all of the different colors of copper, we should get different colors of lightning rod as well to represent all of those creative decisions players are making using them as pipes and other kind of details. And frankly, I love that they've made this decision, because sub-block details are something that we need more and more of in Minecraft as people's standards of building improve, and so I think it's really great to have a lot more color range to play around with. Once again, I really love the weathered one. It has so much detail in such a small texture, and these even look really great as lantern stands, either for the new range of copper lanterns, and you can mix and match the different colors, or a range of torches, now that we have 4 different torches and 4 different lightning rods. And frankly, I just find this kind of adorable. This little rainbow aesthetic just has me tickled for some reason. You can, of course, wax them to make sure that oxidation effect doesn't get removed when they get struck by lightning, if they get struck by lightning. And now if I wanted to make a copper dome, you have a lot more options in all of the different colors, because let's say we wanted to have something like a prismarine wall, a warped fence. On top of that, we could add one of the new weathered lightning rods, we could add some copper bars and copper chains on top of that, and a nice spiky dome roof ornament is available to us. You can design exactly the same thing with granite and junglewood if you want an exposed copper dome. Obviously the fully oxidized one can also adopt the prismarine and warped wood, and a fresh copper one can have the acacia and red sandstone, for example. So lots of stuff you can do. Extra spiky roof ornaments with some of these new additions. I really like some of the changes that you can make to the aesthetics of building with some of these new copper additions. So maybe it's the fact that they've come back to an old feature and breathed new life into it, or maybe I just really like the treatment of the textures and stuff, but lightning rods are going in A tier for me. Now we're getting on to the really good stuff. That's right, it's copper horse armor. Despite the advent of the Happy Ghast, along with all the other forms of transport we've had over the years, Mojang continues to want to make horses happen, and to be fair to the horse girlies out there, I think it's worth having a little bit of copper armor in the game. Certainly diversifies things a little bit for you, and they're just going to take the place of iron horse armor in some loot tables, so I don't think we miss out on any loot as a result. I'm not normally somebody who wears a cape with my Minecraft skin, by the way, so it is at least a little bit of a novelty to see my cape streaming behind me in the wind. But I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the copper horse armor, mostly because I don't really care much for the functionality of riding horses around all that much, so I think ultimately this one's going in C tier. Okay, now it's time to talk about my copper children at long last. We're going to place down some waxed blocks of copper here, pop a carved pumpkin on the top, and we get ourselves 4 copper golems, one of each different color, and they will start checking their copper chests and start checking each other's copper chests as well. Instead of their original mob vote incarnation, which was going to walk around and push copper buttons, these little fellas will search copper chests. If they find anything inside, they will try and move it to a chest placed nearby. Now, of course, they're not going to find anything in there until we start putting items in there, but once they do, they'll locate a chest that's empty, or a chest that already has a stack of that item in it, and they will deposit those items in one of those chests, then return to the copper chest to look for something else. Now this comes with its own set of interesting rules and behaviors, so let's take a look at some of those. For example, if I put, let's say, a stack of copper blocks in here, and I don't put any of those in either of these chests, in fact these chests have no contents whatsoever, they're going to start popping those blocks on in there. And for the most part, they're pretty consistent at tracking to the nearest chest. They will only interact with chests one at a time, so they'll actually form an orderly queue, but as you now see, all of those copper blocks ended up getting put inside of this chest. None of them ended up in the chest next door, because this was simply the closest chest to their point of origin. Let's do a couple of tests of that, shall we? I'm going to put a chest over here and a chest over there, equidistant to both of these chests. We're going to put a stack of blocks of copper in each of these two chests, and we're going to see where those end up. Which chests do the golems typically decide to deposit them in? I think that will depend heavily on whether or not they are standing on one side of the chest or the other, so you have to be fairly sure that you want to leave empty chests around these golems, because they will end up placing items in multiple chests if given the opportunity. But between those two chests, we did get an even number, just based on the fact that one golem was very keen on operating on this side and another was very keen operating on this side. Now let's take a look at what happens if we put a different stack of blocks in there, but only leave one chest which already has items in. Now there are theoretically 26 additional inventory slots which the golems could use to place items in these chests, but once you've assigned a block to a chest like this, it's going to become clear to the golems that that's not where they put that item, and they'll keep the items in their hand and go looking for a different chest, which will take them a little while to spot, but as soon as they do, they'll realize that there's an empty chest there that they can leave a stack of those items in. They are, by the way, doing this 16 items at a time. They can pick up a maximum of 16 items in a stack, and this is going to leave us with some interesting possibilities, because if I put one of each type of block inside of here, and then let's say I grab a stack of each type of copper and put it with each of these copper chests like so, they'll start collecting those items and they'll sort them all into the same chest because there's already a stack started in here. However, if there is a full stack already, they'll simply start another stack. So they're not looking for a stack to add to, they're looking for any item that gives them a clue as to what to store in there. They also won't interact with the chest all at once. They won't even interact with the chest if a player is looking at it. So they will patiently wait their turn for me to close the chest so that they can deliver their items. They're also going to prioritize moving to the nearest chest to them every time they want to make a deposit here, so they're going to check through each of the closest copper chests before they move to this one further away, and you'll notice that this one has a bunch of blocks still left in it, while they're still sorting the last 3 sets of blocks there. So it's not like they assign themselves to one chest and then keep going back and forth. They will basically just do whatever the simplest path is from A to B each time until the horse gets in the way. Until such time as the copper chest that they have been looking in is emptied, at which point they'll continue searching until they find items they can pick up. But sooner or later, as we can see here, all of our stacks of items have ended up in this chest. This makes the copper golem an organic approach to multi-item sorting, which is fantastic for those of us who aren't all that keen on multi-item sorting systems using redstone. There are plenty of tutorials out there that exist for those, but of course they're not always the most intuitive thing if you're trying to puzzle through that stuff on your own. Unfortunately for the copper golem though, I think they still have a couple of glitches that need to be figured out, and not glitches in the literal sense. They aren't glitchy necessarily in their behavior, but they just have a few quirks that I think should probably be dealt with before they go into full production. For example, the fact that copper golems need to be at the same Y level or one block above any chest that they're trying to interact with. Right now, I think if you put a slab next to this, maybe they'll be able to open this chest, but it takes them a little while to figure that out as well, so they're not going to be able to walk up and interact with this chest straight away. It does end up with the copper golems trying to pathfind towards the copper chest because they know it is there, but they can't interact with it at all, even though it is technically within the range of their hitbox. They just don't see it as something they can open. And believe me, I recognize the value of setting parameters for mechanics like this. I think it makes sense, especially visually, that they go to something that they are tall enough to see the contents of, theoretically, assuming that this black void inside of the chest was the contents. But I also know Minecraft players quite well, and I know the fact that some players will want to have their storage systems in some sort of elevated position. I think what this does is introduce a few too many restrictions to the copper golem's behavior. And oh, do you see that? The chest just changed. In terms of the age of copper, by the way, you'll notice the copper golems actually age a lot less frequently than their block counterparts. They do, however, age. It just takes a while for them to do it. We'll come back to that in a second. I also want to draw your attention to the fact that sometimes, even if a chest can be opened, if it has like a slab over the top of it like this, and can be opened like so, because a player can still interact with it, copper golems will still get a little bit confused about this. They'll crowd around the chest, not quite sure what to do with it. Eventually, one or the other of them may figure out that they can open it, at which point the rest of them seem to get the idea as well, and they will start interacting with the chest. But For the most part, they seem a little confused by when chests are obstructed like this and they can't pathfind on top of them. I should also add that despite the fact that we have created these copper golems from waxed blocks of copper, they are not waxed themselves. If I right-click on one of these with an axe, it will revert to an earlier stage of oxidation. If I right-click on that with a honeycomb, that means the wax goes on, and that should prevent that copper golem from aging at all, while the other ones will age, and this one, the oxidized golem, is the closest to stopping completely. At that point, a copper golem will become an oxidized copper golem statue, and it can be scraped to create a weathered, exposed, or fresh copper golem statue. Only when you right-click one of these with an axe will it come back to life again, so you have to scrape all the oxidation off and give it the right-click tap of life with an axe in order for it to spring to life and carry on as one of these golems. So you will want to make sure that you wax your golems at whatever stage you prefer to have them so that they don't end up freezing up and becoming a statue eventually. All of this aside, I do think the copper golem's potential as a multi-item sorter is frankly pretty phenomenal, and I want to give you one specific redstone example of how you could set up a multi-item sorter for these guys to interact with. What if I told you that the ingredients in my hotbar right now are all you need to create a multi-item sorter for a copper golem? Well, that and the stuff that you would put in the chest, of course. That's 1 redstone torch, 2 redstone, and a comparator are all the components that you need, plus an input, an output, oh, and a hopper. I was missing a hopper. Let's say we want this barrel to be the output for all our redstone components. We're going to put a hopper into the back of that, and we're going to lock that hopper. We do that with a redstone torch behind the hopper, which locks the hopper unless the redstone torch is switched off. How is it going to be switched off? Well, we're going to add another block there, 2 pieces of redstone dust there, another block here, a redstone comparator, and then on top of the hopper, we're going to place a double chest. For now, we're going to make sure that the comparator is looking at the left-hand side of the chest, for a reason I will explain shortly. Now, the copper golem should be able to walk up on top of this barrel to interact with the chest, but just for the sake of having a decent-sized platform so that they don't get stuck pathfinding to it, we're going to build the rest of these blocks around the outside of the chest here. And now, prompted by the redstone components available to me in the creative mode inventory, I'm going to place a ton of redstone components in this chest as a key of sorts that's going to tell the copper golems what to look for and what they can deposit in this chest. Importantly, I'm going to do that on the bottom 3 rows of this chest, although it could fill up as much of the chest as you want to, as long as you leave a few slots free here at the top left. So let's say that we want the copper golems to sort these items into the chest. This is our key of items that we created, and the comparator output is currently reading a signal strength of 1. We want to add a few stacks into this inventory. Let's stack up some of the cheapest stuff like buttons, pressure plates, and redstone dust. There we go. And now we've got to a certain capacity. You'll notice that first stack starts to drain down to a comfortable amount. That's now feeding through the hopper because the comparator reads out a signal strength of 2 until such time as the contents of this chest have gotten down to about this number. I think that's just under 4 stacks worth of equipment in here, and you'll notice that all of the redstone dust had started to filter down into this barrel. Now I'll place a copper chest for these copper golems to look for, and we'll fill this with miscellaneous redstone components. Let's grab some slime blocks. Let's not do full stacks of all of these as well. Let's just grab a few of some of these. Let's grab a handful of crafters, maybe a few hoppers. We'll put a tripwire hook in here as well, and we'll add a rogue skulk sensor, which the copper golems should not sort into this chest because they don't know where to put it. It's not part of our item key here. So let's put in some of those. They're going to grab 1 stack of items at a time. They're going to grab 16 per handful, so individually, they're all going to walk up to this chest. They'll deposit the stuff in there. It goes into the left-hand corner because it's not going to stack up with any of the existing items. It's going to choose the first available inventory space. And you'll notice that those items just start draining away into the barrel. So they're going to do this with all of the different items that are available to them in the item key here. This one's bringing over some slime blocks. It's going to get up on top of the chest, drop those in there, and once the redstone dust is done filtering in, it's going to filter the slime blocks as well. You'll notice that the copper golems are also taking the items out of the chest from left to right. So they'll get to the skulk sensor eventually, find that there is no room for it in this chest, and try and find somewhere else to put it. So far, they've done an admirable job of detecting all of these items, popping them in the chest here, and this barrel is now an assortment of different redstone components stacking up in various quantities. And there we go. Now the copper golems have sorted through absolutely everything I wanted them to drop off, and the skulk sensor is nowhere to be found in this chest, buddy. I'm sorry. So we're going to have to right-click on that guy so that he drops that and the player can pick it up. Copper Golems will not pick up loose items from the ground, so there's absolutely no need to worry about that. But they have managed to drop everything off. An item will end up staying in the hopper. This slime block is stuck in there because of the redstone torch turning on slightly too fast, but that's the basic idea. A multi-item sorter like this can be incredibly powerful for these copper golems to just sort a variety of stuff into. You could set up a multi-item filter like this for stairs of various types of materials, for example. All of the different wood types of stairs could go in there, and as long as there were adequate items to produce a redstone signal strength of 2 when the copper golems drop anything in, it will all filter down into a chest that becomes miscellaneous stair storage. Overall, it's a pretty effective system, but there is one flaw to this, which is that you have to build the redstone circuitry this way round. You can't do it the other way, and here is where I will explain why. For the sake of this example, I'm also going to simplify my item key here, so we're just going to use redstone torches, blocks of redstone, repeaters, comparators, that kind of stuff. We're going to leave that all down here as before, and once it gets above 4 stacks, it's going to drain down until there's only a smaller amount of redstone dust. There we go. We've got 64 items of 3 stacks and then 1 stack of 54 items. And that's enough that whenever new items are put in here, it's going to produce a comparator signal strength of more than 1, and those items put in the top left corner there are going to filter down into the barrel. But here's the problem with the copper golem. For whatever reason, when I put redstone dust in this chest and they walk away with it, they'll deposit it in that top left corner as they should, but this does not update the comparator signal, and that's an interesting bug in the way copper golems add items to this chest. The comparator is reading the right-hand side of the chest inventory. It's reading the bottom half of the chest right now. You'd think that would be a concern across the board. You'd think if a player now puts something in the top left corner of this chest, then that's not going to have the same thing either, because the comparator is reading the block data from the right-hand side of this chest, and the top half of the large chest here corresponds to the left-hand side. Well, actually, once I put an item in there, it's going to start draining no problem. Player interaction with this inventory updates the comparator and reminds it that, hey, it should check for a new signal strength. Unfortunately, copper golems right now do not produce that update. And that's a bug, of course. That's something that will hopefully get corrected before the copper golem goes into the full update, but unfortunately, that's a bit of a demerit on the copper golem's part at this point. With that said, of course, this is still an incredibly powerful multi-item sorting system for a very, very low redstone cost. It's maybe a little slower than a lot of multi-item sorting systems, but if you can tolerate the noise that the copper golems make and the speed at which they work, this will be an absolute lifesaver for those of us who aren't all that keen on redstone, because look at the footprint of this thing, look at the minimal amount of redstone components. It's clearly such a useful design that we're going to get so much mileage out of. But unfortunately, I think the copper golem currently has a few too many issues with it that I can't put it in S tier, even though I want to, even though I've been looking forward to the copper golem for such a long time. I've seen modded implementations of it, and the character this thing has, the way they've implemented it, I think is phenomenal, not to mention the fact that the new functionality makes them way more usable than something that just walks around pushing buttons. However, to make it approachable to new players, to make it more intuitive to use, I think they really need to change up how it interacts with chests and fix some of these fringe cases that prevent it from working in some conditions. And for that reason, I think it's going in B tier. And I never expected to put a copper golem in B tier. Let me tell you, that will be an S tier feature once they fix some of the issues with it. Maybe check back in once this update is completely out, and we'll see if my opinion has changed. For now, we need to move on to some of the byproducts of the copper golem, by which I mean the statues and the copper chests themselves. Now, once they age past this stage of oxidation, once they fully stop working, the copper golem will freeze in a variety of different poses. There is stationary like this, there is sitting down, there is mid-walk, and there is this jumping jacks kind of animation that they don't do at any other point, so I find it a little bit silly that they end up in this position, but hey, sometimes they do. And regardless of the age of the statue, each copper golem can be right-clicked on by the player to adjust those poses, kind of similar to how you can right-click on armor stands in Bedrock Edition, but not in Java, to change the armor stands pose as well. And I think one of the coolest elements of this is that you can track this with a comparator signal as well, so whatever pose the copper golem is standing in produces redstone signal strength from a comparator detecting it. They simply cycle in order. The standing pose is signal strength 1, the sitting pose, signal strength 2, the walking pose is signal strength 3, and the jumping jacks pose is signal strength 4. Here's a fun example of how you could use the comparator signal from the copper golem for a really fun combination lock. Let's say, for example, you have 4 copper golems just standing guard out here, but they're all different colors, and that hints as to the aging stage and therefore the pose that you should leave them in. So while we can fiddle with any of these in any sort of order, the door isn't necessarily going to open by itself. It's looking for specific comparator readouts from each one. So the combination here would be something like 2, 2, 3, 1, like so, and then the door opens, revealing my absolute spaghetti of redstone behind it. That kind of combination lock could make a really fun thematic puzzle if you wanted to make a copper golem themed temple or something like that. I feel like that's got a lot of potential to it. So overall, while they don't promise a lot, I think the copper golem statues really deliver. Now let's talk about the chests, and in the time it's taken me to set up that combination lock, one of the chests has already aged. But right there, you got an interesting look at one of the things I think holds the chests back ever so slightly, and it's that they can combine at any age. While it is perfectly possible to place them side by shift clicking, as you can do with other types of chests to prevent them from combining into double chests, if you end up placing a copper chest side by side without that, it's going to revert the age of the chest to whatever the freshest stage of copper is. So for example, right there, I placed an oxidized copper chest next to a regular copper chest, and when they combined, it's a regular copper double chest. If I do the same thing over here, if I add a copper chest next to this oxidized copper chest on that side, it's once again going to become a regular copper chest. If I put an exposed copper chest there and try to add an oxidized one, it's still going to take the exposed copper chest as the baseline. And it's not about whatever chest was placed first, it's about the age of the copper chest. And I think that's an odd behavior. I would honestly prefer if it treated all 4 of the copper chests as different types of blocks, similarly to how if you place a regular chest and a trapped chest side by side, they're always going to stand out as individual blocks and not combine that way. With that said, of course, the fact that we have 4 different types of chest and double chest to add to the game is pretty fantastic. I like the design on the lid. I think, once again, the weathered and oxidized versions of these look wonderful, and I'm sure I could find some use for the exposed copper chest. Honestly, just having a bunch of different chests available to you when you plan out a storage room is going to be a phenomenal boon to those of us who like to build decoratively. In addition to chests and barrels, you're going to be able to have copper chests in there as well, provided you're not using copper golems in the same space, because I think it would get a little bit tiresome to have these chests constantly opening and closing in something like an ordinary storage room. With that said though, they are just chests at the end of the day. They've got a really cool sound effect to them, and I think it's nice that they have their own personality, but the inventory is identical. It even says large chest. It doesn't say anything about it indicating that this is a copper chest when you open the inventory. I wonder if maybe they could have had a little bit more going for them on their own, like unique redstone interactions. I'm not certain what those would be, but maybe they send a redstone pulse when you open them instead of a sustained redstone signal like a trapped chest does. Of course, this could create some odd issues with redstone contraptions, so it may be a good idea that they don't do that, but once again, there's no real reason that you would use a copper chest in a redstone contraption and not a regular chest. Either way, I think the copper chests are going in B tier for the simple fact that they are chests without a whole lot of other functionality if the copper golem isn't around. The copper golem statue, on the other hand, is going in A tier because I think they can be used decoratively for great effect, and having redstone functionality is just the icing on the cake. So this leaves us with a solid feature set in A tier, B tier, and C tier. I'll be honest, D tier is kind of a lie here. I don't think anything in this update is D tier. I think they've managed to think these things through super well. But we are forgetting one major addition, which is our only S tier feature on this list, and is ultimately one of the things that I think could be a real game changer for Minecraft in general, and we've been looking at them the entire time on the left-hand side of our tier list. That's the shelf. The shelf is, frankly, a pretty phenomenal addition to the game, especially now they've made a couple of changes to it in Java Edition to bring it in line with when it first debuted on Bedrock Edition. When considered on its own, the shelf is basically 3 item frames side by side in the space of a single block, and you can place items in there, you can place blocks in there, and they will display at slightly different sizes, but I think that's honestly a really good thing. There are a couple of tweaks that were made to these when they were being developed that had the items all kind of smaller, and I think it's much better if they just display as large as they reasonably can. That does mean some of the items stick out by like a pixel over the edge of the shelf there, but it's really not a concern when you look at how good these appear. I think one of the fundamentally coolest things about these shelves is that they can be used to display banners and banner lettering, as we've seen from the tier list already, and I think that's phenomenally cool for shop signage, for movie theater marquees, and I can think of dozens of different uses for just the lettering inside shelves like this. Not to mention that shelves are available in all different wood types. We've got oak, spruce, birch, jungle, acacia, we've got dark oak and mangrove, cherry, and they all have different subtle variations in their design, which I think makes each of them stand out as unique. They are also based on the stripped log design, which means that the texture of them is a little bit smoother than anything that uses plank texture, and not only that, they conform to the size of the back of the block, so when you take a look at them like this, that could provide a really neat pattern to stripped wood. It could basically be a decorative block to enhance stripped wood if you don't look at it from the front. If you look at it from the back on this side, there we go. It's got a border to the stripped log texture. That looks really cool in my opinion. I've already been goofing around with shelves for decorative purposes in other worlds and just kind of testing some stuff out, because why wouldn't you? And look at the way these can be used to smooth out archways. Now, the only thing that makes these ever so slightly tricky to work with on occasion is the fact that they take the stripped log texture so closely that in some cases, like with dark oak wood, where the wood has a little bit of a warmer color while the stripped log is a little bit cooler and grayer, you end up losing a little bit of the color harmony that's going on with the rest of the wood set. But outside of that, if you can overlook that, fantastic addition. And it's not even present with most wood types. You'll notice it in warped wood as well, where this is a little bit lighter, where the planks have a lot more shadow to them. But if you take a look at the bamboo ones, the mangrove ones, the pale oak, even the oak and birch ones, I think those are all spectacularly well fitted to their wood type. And honestly, once you take a look at the shape of this and how detailed arches can be now, not to mention the fact that you can use them to detail the tops of columns and stuff like that, there's really no problem there. It's the kind of thing that's very, very minor. You can overlook it. You could even redo it with a resource pack if you wanted to. Here is the full range of shelves. By the way, I laid them all out in this little testing world that I used to doodle a couple of things, and these look pretty fantastic, I would say. There's not one among them that I think really needs that much tweaking. Here's another fun example of how you could use the lettering for something in a more modern build. If you wanted to create a home and away score for a sports field in a modern school or sports stadium or something like that, I feel like these work fantastically well, especially in this pale oak. Shelves will interact with hoppers as well. I've got these hoppers locked right now, and I've got some input hoppers on the back there. I've been considering ways of working these into some sort of messaging system using banner lettering, although the precise redstone for this escapes me right now. It's going to take a lot of precision timing to make sure that 3 items can get into each of these shelves and then skip over that hopper to get to the next shelf, not to mention double characters and stuff. There's a lot of like little intricacies that I'm having a hard time figuring out about that, but I'm sure the redstone minded amongst you will take that as an interesting challenge and produce a really neat messaging system for use on stuff like multiplayer servers. Shelves can easily be placed back to back as well. They don't require supporting blocks, so you can use them as I-beams, girders in more industrial looking builds. And here's another example, like I said, of the colonnade design that you can figure out with adding a little ornament to the shelf here, making it look like the columns that you built have more detailed top parts. I think those could be really, really fun in the right hands. But I think the absolute pinnacle of shelf functionality comes from the fact that if they are powered by redstone, they become a hotbar swapper. Let's take a single one of these shelves, place it there, and power it with a redstone block, and you'll see that instead of having the grooves individually for the different items on there, this whole thing becomes a single slot. And now what that will do is take the last 3 items from my hotbar and with a single click, deposit them all on the shelf, regardless of whether they are stacks or single items. The coolest part of this is if you chain together 2 shelves, it does the last 6 items in your hotbar, like so, and it will remember the positions of them as well, so whenever you right-click on them again, it just deposits the entire thing back in your hotbar in the same order. Which leads us to this. The fact that this entire set of shelves is powered means I can take off any of these, I can swap them around if I want to, or I can just swap my entire hotbar out here into my inventory. And one of the coolest parts is this opens up a whole world of opportunity for stuff they could add in future. For example, if there was a hotkey that allowed you to swap your hotbar with a row of your inventory. They do this in Stardew Valley. They have a tab key that lets you cycle through the rows of your backpack into your hotbar, and I think that would be perfect in Minecraft in the instance that you're using stuff like shelves. Let's say, for example, that I had my inventory laid out with all of these banners. I'm going to simulate this using the saved hotbar functionality, but bear with me, it'll basically be the same thing. If we end up putting our entire hotbar on this shelf, then we can cycle through our hotbar to, let's say, the first row of the inventory, and then we can put that on the top shelf, put that middle row on that shelf, and put the last row on that shelf, and we've dumped our entire inventory in the space of 4 clicks and a couple of hotkey presses. That would be absolutely amazing functionality, especially when combined with the notion that you can drain shelves using hoppers, which means you could basically dump your entire inventory into a hopper chain without having to go through and tediously control queue everything. Not to mention, you can also use this hotbar swapping technology for something like building. If, let's say, you set up your hotbar with a bunch of equipment and you wanted some blocks to swap out here and there for the tools that you're using less frequently, if I just right-click on this, it swaps out my hotbar, complete with all of the tools that I left in there as duplicates of my existing tools, so those can still occupy the same slots. I don't lose my food or my pickaxe or a sword if I need to defend myself, but I get these 3 spaces for blocks, and if we want to swap back, we can simply put those back in there. If you have a hopper feeding into the middle shelf there, of course, you could have those fill up in the background. If you just left 1 of each block in each of these inventory spaces, you could swap your hotbar, have all of the blocks fill up in there whilst you're making a couple of alterations to the build using the tools that you put away, and then you could swap back for the building supplies once they had completely refilled themselves. But as it is, I think they are a perfect feature, and that is why they're getting the only position on S tier on this drop, which is full of copper. And who thought the Copper King would not put another copper feature in S tier? But I just think there's a couple of refinements that need getting made to the Copper Golem before it can be put in S tier itself. And I think the other stuff is fantastic for builders. It's great for the majority of players who want to tangle with this stuff. But I think those of you who are not all that keen on copper will probably just want a couple of the functional bits of this, and shelves, I think, are going to dominate the discussion for years to come. But that's where we're going to shelve this discussion. I hope you've enjoyed my little tier list video. Let me know if you like doing stuff like this, because I would be happy to revisit this for future drops, as long as they have the breadth of features that this gameplay drop does. This added a ton of stuff. Even if some of it is derivative of what has come before, there are a bunch of really exciting things on this list, and I can't wait to see what Mojang is cooking up next. For now, folks, thank you so much for watching. It was really fun to bring the Copper King back, at least for this little video. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.